Hello, my friends. Before we start, please like and subscribe.
I had never spent a night alone in that house before. It was my uncle's old place, a two-story Victorian with peeling paint and shutters that never quite stayed closed. I had agreed to house sit while he went to Florida for a week. He assured me it would be quiet, peaceful. I had expected that too. The first evening passed uneventfully. I unpacked my things, made a small dinner, and tried to settle in with a book. By 10, I had turned off most of the lights, leaving only a lamp in the living room. That's when I first noticed the shadow. At first, I thought it was a trick of the curtains in the wind, but then it moved, or rather, it stayed in place perfectly still, and I realized it wasn't a shadow at all. It was a person standing at the edge of the driveway, outside the front window. I couldn't make out details in the dim streetlight, just a tall shape. I told myself it must be someone passing by, maybe looking for a neighbor, but it didn't move. I went to the window and looked closer. They hadn't moved an inch. I knocked on the glass lightly. No reaction. I tapped harder. Still nothing. My stomach tightened. I reached for my phone, intending to call the police, but realized it had no signal. The house was old. Reception was always spotty. I cursed myself for not checking earlier. I decided to leave it alone. Surely, whoever it was would leave eventually. I tried to focus on my book, but I couldn't. Every time I glanced toward the window, the figure was still there. Hours passed, and I kept seeing them standing exactly the same, never turning, never moving. By midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled on a jacket and grabbed the flashlight from the hall closet. I stepped outside, trying to convince myself I was being paranoid. The air was cold and damp, smelling faintly of autumn leaves and wet asphalt. I called out, "Hey, can I help you?" No response. I approached cautiously. Whoever, or whatever, it was, they didn't flinch. I got closer, and that's when I realized something impossible. The figure had no face. The streetlight hit it just enough to see smooth, blank skin where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. I stumbled backward, tripping over the curb, heart hammering. The figure didn't move, didn't react. Then, almost imperceptibly, it lifted its hand and pointed at me. I ran inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it. My breaths came in sharp bursts. I checked every lock, every window. I tried to tell myself it was some kind of prank or hallucination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The rest of the night was unbearable. I stayed in the living room, lights on, clutching a baseball bat I'd found in the closet. I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the floor, every whisper of wind against the walls set my heart racing. By morning, I thought it might have been a dream, some trick my exhausted mind had played. But when I opened the blinds, the figure was back, standing across the street. It hadn't moved. It didn't blink. It didn't breathe, at least not visibly. It simply stood there, watching. I decided to call my uncle. The number went straight to voicemail. Then I tried a neighbor I knew. No answer. I realized with a sinking feeling that I was completely cut off. Days passed. Each night, the figure returned. Sometimes it was across the street, sometimes at the end of the driveway. It never moved closer, but the unease it caused was unbearable. I couldn't leave the house. I couldn't stay calm. One evening, after a particularly long day of trying to ignore it, I noticed something new. There were small marks on the front door, tiny scratches, almost like fingernails dragging across the paint. I hadn't seen them before. My hands shook as I touched them. That night, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and intended to leave, despite the dark. I grabbed my keys, my phone, and the bat. As I opened the door, the figure was closer than usual, on the porch just outside the threshold. I froze. It raised its faceless head toward me, tilting it in a way that seemed unnaturally deliberate. Then it moved, not walking, not running, just gliding forward impossibly fast straight through the gate. I stumbled back, slammed the door, and locked it. I spent hours thinking, planning, trying to figure out what to do. Police wouldn't believe me. Friends would think I was losing it. And the figure, it didn't seem interested in hurting me. Not exactly. It was studying me, learning me, as though it existed to observe, to understand. On the fourth night, I made a choice. I wouldn't try to escape. I would confront it. Maybe that was stupid. Maybe I was finally ready to lose my mind. But I needed to know. I opened the door just enough to slip outside, flashlight in hand. The figure stood there, waiting. I tried to speak, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" It tilted its head. I swear I could feel it listening. Then, without a sound, it reached into its own chest and pulled something out. A small, smooth object the color of pale clay. It held it out to me. I didn't move. I don't know why I did it. Some instinct, some foolish curiosity. I reached out and took the object. Instantly, I felt everything. Not memories, not thoughts exactly, but emotions, fear, longing, regret, anger, all swirling inside me. The world shifted. I was no longer standing in the driveway. I was everywhere and nowhere, seeing every street, every alley, every shadowed corner where the faceless ones waited, observing, always observing. I dropped the object. The figure vanished. My knees hit the asphalt. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The city felt different, heavy, watching, alive. When I finally managed to get back inside, I realized something terrifying. The faceless figure hadn't left. I had become it. Not completely, not yet, but part of me had changed. I could feel the watching, the waiting, the patient attention that never sleeps. I moved out the next day. I don't go back to that street. I don't answer calls I don't recognize. I stay in well-lit places, and I never look out the window after dark. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I see them. Other figures, faceless, patient, waiting, and I feel them in me. The worst part is knowing this. The someone outside isn't just outside. They're in everyone who looks too closely, who notices the shadows. And now, I am one of them, whether I want to be or not. I'm always watching, always outside. Even when I'm inside. I had been looking forward to this trip for months. After a grueling year of city life, my roommate Derek and I decided to escape to the Appalachian Mountains, to a remote campsite he swore was untouched by tourists. The kind of place where the only sounds were birds, wind, and the creek running through the valley. We wanted solitude, and we got it, or so we thought. We arrived in the late afternoon, driving down a narrow, gravel road that twisted and turned through dense forest. The trees were taller than anything I'd seen outside a national park. Mist clung to the undergrowth, curling around ferns and roots like a living thing. Derek parked at a small clearing near a stream, and we began setting up the tent. Everything was quiet except for the water trickling over rocks and the occasional rustle of small animals in the brush. The first night was uneventful. We built a fire, cooked a simple dinner, and watched the smoke curl up into the treetops. The stars were unusually bright, as if the mountains themselves had cleared a window into the sky. I was the first awake. It was past midnight, and the campfire had long since burned down to embers. There was a faint movement in the darkness, just beyond the edge of the clearing. At first, I thought it was a deer or maybe a fox, but then I saw the shadow shift, crouching unnaturally low to the ground, moving without sound. My pulse quickened. "Derek," I whispered, shaking him awake. He groaned. "It's probably just the wind." "No," I said. "Something's out there." He finally sat up, squinting into the black. "Okay, I see it." His voice was tight. "That's not right." We grabbed our flashlights and scanned the perimeter. The forest looked ordinary at first, but then I noticed the trees. Their bark was scratched and gouged in long vertical marks, jagged and fresh. Small footprints led from the tree line toward the creek, elongated and uneven, like nothing I'd seen before. We tried to follow them, but they stopped abruptly in a circle around a particularly old oak. Around its base, the earth was churned and bare, and dark stains suggested something had been dragged. I felt an unease settle in my stomach, heavier than anything I had ever felt in the woods. We returned to the tent, adrenaline fading into anxious exhaustion. Sleep came fitfully. I dreamed of eyes, hundreds of them, peering at me from the forest, blinking in unison, unblinking when I tried to look closer. I woke to the sensation of being watched, even in the safety of our small tent. The next morning, we decided to hike. We thought a change of scenery would calm us down. But as soon as we left the clearing, the trail felt wrong. Landmarks we had memorized, boulders, fallen logs, creek bends, were slightly shifted, as if the forest had rearranged itself overnight. I told myself it was my imagination, but Derek noticed too. He frowned and said, "The trail doesn't feel right. Something's off." We pressed on, following what we thought was the path back to the main road, when the fog thickened and the trees seemed to close in. The whispers began then, low, unintelligible murmurs drifting through the mist. I froze. Derek did too. They were too deliberate to be wind, repeating in patterns that felt almost conversational. We tried to ignore them, but they grew louder, circling us from all directions. Then we saw them, shapes moving just beyond the fog, hunched thin impossibly fast. I couldn't make out faces, but I could feel their eyes on us, bright and reflective. The whispers formed words we could almost understand. Stay, stay, stay. Panic set in. We turned to run and realized we were walking in circles. Every tree, every rock looked the same. The trail we thought led out had vanished. Our compass spun wildly. Our GPS refused to signal. Fear clawed at my chest. Hours, or maybe minutes. Time had lost all meaning. We stumbled upon an old, abandoned cabin. Its windows were dark, the wood rotting and warped. Derek hesitated. "We should keep moving," he said, voice tight. But I was desperate. I needed somewhere to hide. Inside, the cabin was empty, but smelled of damp wood and something metallic. I noticed symbols etched into the walls, crude and angular, forming patterns that felt familiar and wrong at the same time. The floor was littered with old stones, arranged in a rough circle. My heart sank. A shadow moved across the doorway, not outside but inside. Something crouched low, limbs bent in impossible ways. Eyes glowed faintly, reflecting our flashlight beams. It hissed, not like an animal, but like air being sucked through a narrow slit. And in that hiss, I could swear I heard a name. My name. Derek grabbed my arm. "We can't stay here." But we didn't have a choice. The creature didn't approach, it simply waited. We backed into the corner, breathing shallow, the shadows pressing closer. The whispers returned, louder now, almost chanting. And then the floor beneath us shifted. Not the wood, the earth itself. The cabin was hollowing, sinking slowly, inexorably. Panic surged. We bolted out the back door and ran blindly into the fog. I could feel something brushing past us, cold and clammy, tugging at our clothing, whispering promises and threats all at once. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but the forest seemed endless. And then, just as abruptly as it started, it stopped. We burst into a small clearing, dew-soaked and quiet. The cabin was gone. The shadows were gone. The forest was ordinary again. We didn't speak as we ran until we reached the main road, exhausted and disoriented. Cars passed. The world outside the mountains resumed normally. We tried to explain what happened, but who would believe us? Authorities found no trace of the cabin, no footprints, nothing. Only a small, black stone I had picked up in the clearing remained in my pocket. Smooth, warm, almost alive. We left the mountains immediately. Derek swore he would never return. I promised the same, but nights later, I realized the stone was pulsing faintly. It hummed beneath my palm, like a heartbeat, a tether calling me back. Weeks later, I awoke in the middle of my apartment to see the forest creeping through the windows. Not real, not fully, but visible. Trees pressed against walls, shadows crawling along the ceiling, whispers curling through the air. And then I understood. The forest doesn't just exist in the mountains. It exists wherever its remnants touch. A stone, a seed, a footprint left behind. It watches. It waits. It chooses. And by taking that stone, I had chosen too. Derek didn't, but the forest didn't forget him. Sometimes I swear I see him in the shadows, just beyond my vision, running endlessly, chased by shapes only he can see. And I know, one day, the forest will reclaim me completely, unless I return the stone. But the pull is growing stronger, the whispers louder, and I'm not sure I want to resist anymore. The Appalachians are beautiful, yes, majestic, but they're patient, and in their patience, they are deadly. I had always thought camping was supposed to be peaceful. Fresh air, quiet nights, the smell of pine and fire smoke. That's why I didn't understand why, as I drove up the winding road toward the ridge, my stomach kept twisting in knots. My friends and I had planned this trip for months, a weekend away from the city, far from phones, far from anything that reminded us of real life. Just the four of us, me, Laura, Nate, and Josh. Nate claimed he knew a perfect spot, a remote clearing near a small lake where no one ever went. We arrived in late afternoon, the sun hanging low in the sky, golden light spilling through the trees. The forest smelled sharp and alive. Birds flitted overhead, squirrels darted across the trail, and everything felt just a little too still. Nate laughed as we parked, tossing our packs onto the ground. "You'll see," he said, "this place is untouched. Nobody comes here. Nobody should." We hiked the final stretch and found the clearing. A small lake shimmered at the center, surrounded by pines whose branches leaned in as if to watch us. The ground was soft under our feet, littered with needles and broken twigs. We set up camp and gathered firewood, joking and teasing each other. As the sun sank, the water mirrored the sky like glass, perfect and still. That first night, everything felt off. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every rustle in the underbrush, every cracking branch made me flinch. The others laughed it off, blaming it on nerves or imagination, but I couldn't. I could feel it. Something in the woods was observing us, patient, waiting. We went to bed early, tired from the hike, but I barely slept. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to a sound, the soft splash of water from the lake. At first, I thought it was a fish, but then I realized it was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I slipped out of the tent, flashlight in hand. The beam cut across the lake, and I froze. There was a figure standing in the water, half submerged, motionless, tall, too tall, almost impossibly so. Its limbs were long, thin, and bent at strange angles. Its head was tilted as if studying me. I blinked and it was gone. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. Nothing, but the water still rippled, though there was no wind. I tried to wake the others, shaking Laura gently, whispering to Nate and Josh. None of them stirred. I checked my phone. No signal, of course, but the screen lit up with a text I hadn't received. Don't move. I froze. My heart was pounding. The text repeated over and over. I wanted to scream, but my voice failed. Something shifted behind me. I spun, flashlight shaking, and for a fraction of a second, I saw dozens of figures emerging from the treeline, tall, thin, and impossibly still, watching. Then they were gone. Morning came, but it brought no comfort. The lake was calm again, the sun bright, the forest seemingly normal. I told myself it was a dream, a hallucination from too little sleep. Nate was brewing coffee, Josh was fishing, Laura humming. Everything appeared mundane, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being studied. We spent the day hiking and exploring, but the forest seemed to twist. Trails I thought I knew looped back on themselves. Clearings were strangely familiar, yet alien. Every few minutes, I caught glimpses of figures between the trees, always at the edge of my vision, vanishing when I looked directly. Nate dismissed it. You're just jumpy. Enjoy the weekend. But I couldn't. That evening, as the sun sank again, something happened that made my blood run cold. The fire died suddenly, though we had fed it minutes before. Shadows leapt across the clearing, unnaturally long, crawling along the ground. Then the whispering started, low, indistinct, almost syllables I couldn't understand, coming from all around us. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the treeline. Figures were standing there, tall, spindly, their heads tilting unnaturally. One stepped forward, and I saw its face, or at least the shape of it, like a mask of darkness, void where eyes and mouth should be. My friends were oblivious, laughing, but I knew they couldn't see them yet. Suddenly, Nate froze. His eyes widened, and he whispered, "They're here." I turned to look, and he wasn't looking at me. He was staring past me, into the firelight, hands trembling. The figures were closer now, just beyond the glow. I felt compelled to move toward them, but my legs refused. The night dragged on, timeless. The figures never approached, never spoke, never attacked. They merely watched. And then, without warning, the air shifted. The lake bubbled as if something massive stirred beneath. Ripples spread outward, then the water receded, revealing footprints in the mud. They weren't human. Long, wide, with deep grooves stretching from the water's edge into the forest. I had an instinctive, horrifying realization. They had come from the lake. They weren't visitors. They lived there. The forest, the lake, they were their domain, and we were intruders. We decided to leave at first light. I packed frantically, urging everyone to hurry, but when we reached the trail, the forest had changed. Trees were denser, paths warped. Every step forward seemed to bring us in a circle. I called out for help, but only echoes answered. Hours, or was it minutes? passed. The sun barely moved. Panic set in. Then Laura screamed. I ran to her and saw what made her shriek, a figure standing beside her. Not like the others. This one was humanoid, human-shaped, but its face was blurred like it had no features. She reached for me, but her eyes were empty, glazed over. She whispered, "They want us to join." I grabbed her arm, shaking her. Josh and Nate were nowhere in sight. The forest seemed close in. My heart pounded. I ran, dragging Laura with me, following what I hoped was the trail out. Then I saw the lake again, but it wasn't the lake we had known. The water shimmered unnaturally, black and mirror-like, reflecting a sky that wasn't ours. Shapes moved beneath the surface, twisting, writhing, and I knew, somehow, that this was where the figures came from. They wanted us to see. They wanted us to understand. Laura collapsed. I tried to lift her, but she whispered, trembling, "It's too late." I didn't know what she meant, but before I could respond, the water surged, rising impossibly high, and the figures emerged. Not just from the lake, trees, shadows, even the ground itself became them. They were endless, surrounding me, patient, waiting. I shut my eyes. When I opened them again, I was alone on the shore. Laura, Nate, Josh, they were gone. Only the lake remained, calm as ever, as if nothing had happened. The sun hung low. My backpack lay where I had dropped it, my phone untouched. No one would believe me. No one could. I left the forest that day and never went back. I try to forget, but sometimes when I'm alone at night, I see ripples on the water in my dreams. I hear whispers in the wind, and I know that they are waiting for the next intruders to wander too far from the trail, to step too deep. The strangest part, and the part that terrifies me most, is that the forest remembers. The lake remembers. And every time I hear about a new camping trip, a new perfect spot, I shiver, because I know that they are patient. They do not forget, and one day, if I'm not careful, they may come for me too. I didn't mean to get lost. I've spent most of my life wandering the Appalachian Mountains, hiking trails, exploring hollows, chasing the quiet. I've been alone in the forest before, and I've always felt a home there. But that summer changed everything. Something went wrong, something I can't explain, and I barely made it out alive. My name is Simon. I was 25, working long hours at a tech job I hated, and I needed to escape. I drove north from Asheville, North Carolina, into a section of the Pisgah National Forest that I'd only hiked once before a decade ago. I wanted solitude, and this place, steep ridges, dense hardwoods, and hollows that barely show on any map, promised it. I arrived midday, parked at an old logging trailhead, and started walking. The sun was high, golden through the trees. I followed the path for hours, stopping only to drink from streams or take notes on the wildlife. Birds flitted through the canopy, squirrels chattered in the underbrush, and the forest smelled of pine and earth. Everything was normal, too normal in retrospect. By the second night, I had set up a small campsite near a dry creek bed. I made a fire, boiled some water, and watched the smoke curl into the treetops. That's when I first noticed something odd. The forest felt wrong, not threatening, exactly, just different, quieter. The usual chorus of nocturnal sounds was gone, replaced by a heavy, oppressive stillness. I told myself it was just the wind, or maybe I was imagining things. But then I heard it, a voice. Not a human voice, but something resembling speech, soft and low. It was like a syllable drawn out in the distance. "Simon." I froze, scanning the trees. Nothing moved. My heart pounded. I told myself it was my imagination. I had to believe it. The next morning, I woke to find the forest around me had changed. The ridge I had camped on the day before looked entirely different, though I knew that exact spot. The creek curved the wrong way. Trees I remembered were gone, replaced by unfamiliar oaks and maples. I checked my GPS. It flickered and died. My compass spun without reason. I was lost, and I knew it. I tried retracing my steps, but the trail had vanished. Hours turned into a confusing blur. Every ridge I climbed, every hollow I descended, brought me back to the same impossible clearing, a small open patch of earth with stones arranged in a crude circle. The air smelled metallic, like blood, though I saw no sign of injury. As I stared at the circle, I noticed markings etched into the stones, symbols I didn't recognize, jagged, spiraling shapes that seemed to shift when I looked away. I felt an overwhelming nausea, my head spinning, a low hum vibrating in my chest. And then I saw them. Figures, tall and thin, emerging from the tree line. Not human, but not entirely animal. Their limbs bent at unnatural angles. Their faces were featureless, smooth, like bark or clay, with dark hollows where eyes should be. They didn't move like living creatures. They drifted, gliding over the leaves surrounding the circle. I wanted to run, but my legs refused. The ground beneath me felt sticky, as if holding me in place. The largest figure stepped forward, its head tilting as though examining me. Then I heard it, a voice in my head. "You belong here." Panic surged. I screamed, but no sound came out. My rifle lay useless at my side, and even if I could pick it up, I knew it would not help. The figures inched closer. I closed my eyes, thinking of my apartment, my job, my friends. I begged for it to be a dream. Then something moved differently, slightly wrong. A shadow peeling off one of the figures and approaching me independently. It whispered again inside my mind, clearer this time. "Give yourself." I realized what it wanted. It wasn't just my body, but one of my awareness, my consciousness. To stay in the mountains, inside their hollowed woods, and never leave. I panicked, thrashing against the earth, and in that moment, I remembered an old story my grandmother had told me about the Appalachian shadow folk, spirits that claimed lost travelers, keeping them between trees and time. They could be distracted, she said, by leaving something of value behind, a token of self. Desperate, I tore a page from my notebook, wrote my name, my birth date, anything that made me me, and placed it in the center of the stone circle. I whispered a prayer I barely believed in. The figures halted, their forms wavering. The forest trembled as if debating. Then, slowly, they retreated, dissolving into the mist. I ran, faster than I ever thought possible, breaking through brambles, leaping over roots. I didn't stop until I reached the logging trail, and even then, I kept going until the sounds of the hollow faded behind me. When I emerged at a small road, the world looked normal again. Cars passed, birds chirped, people laughed in yards. I tried to explain what happened to the ranger station nearby, but they looked at me like I was crazy. "The trails out here can be confusing," one said. "You probably just lost your bearings." I knew better. I left the mountains that day, vowing never to return. I went back to the city, to my life, to work, to the mundane and safe. But something changed inside me. I can't sleep deeply anymore. Shadows twitch in the corners of my apartment. Sometimes when I glance at the woods outside the city, I swear I see figures in the trees, tall, thin, gliding silently. And then I realized the worst part. I left a piece of myself in those woods. The token I placed in the circle didn't free me entirely. It only distracted them. A fragment of my awareness, my consciousness, remained in the hollow. Sometimes I wake to memories that aren't mine. Dreams of walking endlessly through a forest that changes as I move. Whispers that call me back. I thought I had escaped, but the mountains are patient. One morning, I woke to find my hand scratched, as if climbing roots or brambles, though I had slept in my bed all night. And on my nightstand, beside my alarm clock, was a single, smooth stone etched with a jagged spiral I recognized from that circle in the hollow. The mountains remember me. They are waiting. And I know one day they will call again. I've always been the type of person who couldn't resist abandoned places. Old factories, shuttered schools, forgotten hospitals. They called to me in a way I could never explain. Most people I know wouldn't step foot in one, but I'd always felt that the stories, the remnants, were worth the risk. I wish that night had been the exception, but it wasn't. I found the Dawson textile mill on a map, a crumbling factory on the outskirts of a small town in Pennsylvania. It had been abandoned for nearly 50 years after a series of accidents that killed half the night crew one winter. No one would talk about it. The locals would just cross themselves and whisper about the cursed machines and the screams that sometimes echoed on cold nights. Of course, that was exactly why I had to go. It was late November, and the air had that biting chill that makes every breath sting. The mill sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by bare trees whose branches scratched against the gray sky like fingers. From the outside, it looked smaller than I expected, but as soon as I stepped inside, I realized the building swallowed light whole. The roof sagged in places, and the floorboards creaked under my weight. Dust hung thick, disturbed only by the shafts of moonlight that cut through the broken windows. I switched on my flashlight and stepped carefully, keeping my eyes on the floor. Old machinery loomed around me. Rusted looms, broken spinning wheels, conveyor belts frozen mid-motion. The smell was sharp, metal, oil, and rot. I pulled out my camera and began taking photos, trying to document everything. The shadows seemed too dark, too solid, and I felt a shiver run down my spine as though the building itself were aware of me. I moved through the main hall where the machines were lined up like sentinels and came across the old office area. Filing cabinets were overturned, papers scattered and yellowed. I picked up a stack and sifted through them. Payroll records, maintenance logs, and a few notes scribbled in frantic handwriting. One line caught my eye. The whispers are stronger at night. They know we're here. I laughed nervously. Whispers, sure. Probably just the wind through the broken walls, I said to myself. But the laughter sounded hollow. The main floor led to the basement. That's where the real stories began, according to what little I had read. The basement had been the scene of the worst accidents. They said people would go down there to fix broken machines and never return. I hesitated, flashlight trembling in my hand, but curiosity or stupidity pushed me forward. The stairwell smelled worse than the rest of the building. Mold, rust, something organic I couldn't place. Each step groaned beneath me. When I reached the basement, I realized the space was far larger than I had imagined. Ceilings low, support beams looming, and shadows that seemed to shift even when I stood still. The machinery here was ancient, half buried under dust and debris. I was scanning the room when I heard it, the first whisper. It was faint, almost imperceptible like wind brushing against metal. Go leave. I froze. My hand gripped the flashlight tighter. Hello. I called. My voice echoed, hollow and small. No answer. I told myself I was imagining it and pressed on. The further I went, the stronger the feeling became that I was not alone. Shadows pooled in corners, but I could make out shapes, figures, maybe, but I couldn't tell for sure. Something about them didn't obey the rules of light. They weren't moving like living things, but they were there, waiting. I found a small maintenance room. Doors rusted shut long ago. Peering inside through a gap, I saw a desk with a single photograph lying on it. I recognized the building immediately. It was the mill, but the people in the photo were strange. Their faces were blurred, as if smeared, and their eyes were hollow, black voids. One of them looked directly at the camera, or rather, through it, like it was aware I was watching. I shivered and stepped back, tripping over a piece of pipe. That's when I noticed the temperature drop. My breath fogged, and a faint humming started in my ears. I turned in a circle. The basement seemed to stretch endlessly, corridors and rooms I hadn't seen before. Doors that shouldn't exist led to more hallways. I realized then that the building itself had changed. Panic set in. I tried to retrace my steps, but everything was different. Shadows pressed closer, shapes taking form just at the edge of my vision. I glimpsed them, workers from decades past, or what had become of them. Their faces blank, their limbs too long, some crawling along walls or hanging from ceilings as if defying gravity. They didn't speak, but their presence was suffocating. I ran down twisting corridors, over broken machinery, tripping and scraping myself. Whispers filled the air, overlapping into a chorus that made my head spin. Stay, join us, don't leave. And then I saw it. The main floor again, or at least it looked like it. Moonlight spilling through broken windows, the office area visible in the distance. Relief surged through me, but I stopped cold. On the floor in front of me was my own body. It was lying there, eyes wide open, mouth frozen mid-scream. I stumbled back, tripping again. The whispers turned into laughter, low, guttural, inhuman. My body, or whatever that was, remained on the ground, staring at me with dead certainty. I ran past it, heart hammering. I didn't stop, didn't look back until I found an exit. The door was there, just as it should have been. Outside, the night was cold but calm. Trees swayed gently in the breeze, the fog lifting. The mill looked abandoned again, harmless almost, but my hands were shaking, my chest tight with terror. I thought I was safe. I thought I had escaped. I didn't realize what had truly happened until the next morning. I woke up in my apartment, but something was off. My reflection in the mirror moved differently, slightly delayed, as though it wasn't following me, but observing me. My phone was on the counter, but all my photos from the night were gone. Every trace of the mill had vanished from my memory, except for the fear, the unshakable sense that something followed me home. Days later, I noticed it in small ways. Objects in my apartment moved slightly when I wasn't looking. Shadows lingered longer than they should. I felt eyes on me constantly. And then, one night, I woke to see figures standing just beyond the glass of my window. Pale, faceless, watching. I blinked and they were gone, but I knew they hadn't really left. That was when I realized the truth. I hadn't escaped the mill. The mill had escaped me. Whatever had touched me that night, whatever had whispered and watched, had followed me into the world of the living. I wasn't entirely me anymore, and part of the building was now alive inside me. I tried to warn people online, tried to explain, but the words never come out right. Every time I type, something corrects them, changes them, as if whatever is inside me wants its own story told. I can feel it moving, growing, waiting. I went back once, months later, under the guise of curiosity, needing to see if it was real. The mill was gone, completely gone. Nothing remained but a patch of overgrown land. No windows, no doors, no structure. Just the wind in the trees and the distant hum of the town. I know the truth now. Some places don't stay abandoned. Some places wait, learning, growing, and when they're ready, they follow. They don't just haunt buildings, they haunt you. And I know it won't be long before the mill calls me again. I can feel it in my bones. Something went wrong that night, and now I carry it with me. I'm not sure what will happen next, but one thing is certain. I am never truly alone, and the Dawson textile mill isn't finished with me yet. Because some places don't forget.
I hope you enjoyed the story. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more terrifying tales.